Enemy power-up detected.
How's it going, Mech fans? It's Cozened Indigo here, bringing you another comp-specific podcast. And this time round, it is a look at the Inner Sphere Coalition. The tournament has wrapped up now, so it is a great time to geek out a little bit on some mech stats and check in on how the teams performed, what mechs were used, what strats were popular, and what about this comp might be relevant for the World Champs and other tournaments, competitive tournaments moving forward. Now, we do plan to talk with tournament organisers Not Bob and Callan Farstar, both from Aces Wild, and we wanted to discuss with them, how they felt about the tournament itself, how it had gone, and in particular, looking at the structure and the format, because ISC was a little different. But for this episode, we're going to focus just on the teams, on the strats, and see what we can say about their performance. Now, I will keep it pretty brief, obviously, on each of the teams, as there is only so much time that we've got. So just before we talk stats, a quick reminder, of course, that ISC was a 6v6 Inner Sphere only tournament, and there were 6 rounds in total. Your opponent each week was decided via a Swiss system. Now, in short, that's a matching system that attempts to place teams against other teams that have a similar kind of win or loss record each round, and the hope being that it leads to you facing teams who are performing similar to you and hopefully of a similar skill level. So keep in mind factors like Inner Sphere mechs generally have more hit points, they're a bit more tanky. There are only 6 mechs on the field that you can shoot and do damage to. The tonnage limit was only 325, so you're only going to see certain types of mechs out there generally, and that the format itself is going to mean that teams are generally matched up, as we've said, against teams of equal skill level. Now, there's probably a ton of other things that I don't really have time to cover in the podcast today that were probably influential, but be sure, if there's things that you can think of from your experience in comp or just from seeing it that you think were influential, and put those down in the comments below, because again, it's always good to get that feedback and just to put that in towards the community and give them that kind of perspective. Now, fair warning that there is a bit to go through, and I can only be very brief on each of the teams as I mentioned, and I do get accused of going on a bit, so yeah, if you can't handle my sexy Kiwi accent for too long, I will leave some timestamps in the show notes so that you can just jump to the various parts in the episode and check some things out. Right, let's start with the teams. There were 33 teams, which was a pretty good show out, to be honest. And I'll go through each of the teams from first, where they finished in the final standings, from first through to 33rd. Now, to assess how a team performed, I'm not only going to look at how many games they won, but how they finished compared to where they were initially ranked. As you know, each team was seeded coming into the tournament. The strength of their schedule, so how tough were the opponents that they played, and some of the efficiencies in the game, like kill rate or the kill accuracy. So what I mean by that, I'll talk about a team's KD, and just like a player's KD, that's the number of mechs that they've killed against the number of deaths on their team. Kill rate is the percentage of mechs they killed against the total that was fielded against them. And when we're talking strength of schedule, then I'm tallying up the seedings, the opposition seeding that was being played against, and putting that as a total, and then ranking everyone depending on how high or low that total was. Right. First place was EMP, and they had a pretty commanding performance in the tournament. They did come in ranked first, so of course they have finished where they were expected, but truth be told, that doesn't really tell everything. They were really only challenged in one match, and that was against other heavyweights, JGX. They won, of course, all of their 6 matches. They had a KD of 3.6 and a kill rate of 91%. Important to keep in mind though that they performed this way against the toughest schedule of the tournament. So a very, very impressive showing by EMP. Much better, I think, than MOR. They really have established themselves of late as a super, super heavyweight. And as we hit World Champs and Eon hopefully become a factor again, it's going to be really, really interesting to see those two go at it. In second and third, we have 228th Blackwatch and JGX Black Omen. Now, those two teams are actually playing a tiebreaker to see which one finishes second and which one finishes third. I'm actually not sure whether that has been played yet, so I'm just going to treat them effectively as second equal. I'll start with 228th Blackwatch, and they came in ranked 4th, so finishing second equal is a pretty good result for them. They also had the third toughest schedule, so again, that's a relevant factor. Now, they won 5 of their matches. They had a KD of 2.3 and a kill rate of 79%. Their accuracy, though, was pretty comparable to EMP, so on average, they destroyed 2.2 components per mech that they had killed. So yeah, again, if we see a relatively low component destruction figure compared to the amount of mechs that they've killed, that would tend to tell us that the team is pretty efficient in their in killing a mech. They're only having to destroy 1 or 2 components. 1 obviously being the minimum and 2 being the most common. If you're going to 3 or more, then you start to shoot off arms and all of these other things. So we're taking that today as a proxy for accuracy. So again, the other team there, JGX Black Omen, they were very impressive as well, and they came in, of course, ranked at second, so they finished where they were expected. They also won 5 of their matches, only losing to EMP. They had a KD of 2.9 and a kill rate of 85%, and of course they had the second toughest schedule in the tournament. They were pretty comparable to EMP in damage and in match score, but they were possibly just a little bit less accurate. They had a rate of 2.5 components destroyed per mech killed. They really did showcase how well they were playing in that match against EMP in round 5. As I said, they were the only team to really challenge EMP, and that match went down to the last drop. It was very, very close and an excellent showing by JGX. In fourth, 228th Wild Ones, and they were somewhat of a surprise finisher, ending up in 4th in the tournament and also winning 5 matches. Now, it is a team full of great players, the likes of Chrisman and JZ and Defunct, but they never won more than 3 drops in a match, and they had just the 16th toughest schedule in the tournament. So that's a really, really favourable draw when you consider that against the teams that I've already mentioned and the teams that I will mention. They had a KD of just 1.2, which is again probably a little underwhelming for a team with the players that they had, and a kill rate of 69%. Now, they did have average match scores and damage comparable to a team like EMP, but again, Wild Ones benefited a bit from the strength of the schedule. Majestic 12 finished in 5th, which is where they came in ranked, but so they had a very, very good tournament. They also had a very, very hard schedule, and they played both the first and second ranked teams. They won 4 matches with a KD of 1.3 and a kill rate of 72%. Now, Majestic really are a team that are pretty firmly in that space, I think, between a Div A team and a Div B team. They pretty much dominated any other Div B team that they played against, but in turn they probably did struggle and got dominated themselves by those true Div A teams like an EMP. So let's just hope that they stick together and they continue to play. I think they are a team that, again, with more time together, that they can get up to that Div A level. They're full of quality. They had a very, very good tournament. Again, when you consider just the teams that they did have to play, they were very, very good. Diamond Shark Alpha Galaxy finished in 6th, and in my opinion have really become the darlings of the comp scene at the moment. They really have epitomized the strength of a team, I guess, in a team game. And despite coming in ranked just 22nd on roster strength, they won 4 matches. They had a KD of 0.9 and a kill rate of 59%, and they did that with the 8th toughest schedule of the tournament. So that is really, really impressive to get out with 4 matches. And I guess that was shown a little bit because they had a far lower accuracy rate than many of the other teams that finished in that top 10. They had to destroy 327 components to get to the 106 kills. So you can see that there's a lot less efficiency there in getting the kills that they did. Now rounds 2 through 5 were particularly impressive for the Shark Boys, and they really did show just how much grit and determination and cohesion ultimately that they have as a team. So an excellent finish for DSAG, and well done to them. Smoke Adders finished in 7th, which is probably just a little bit disappointing for those guys, given that they were actually the 3rd seed coming in. They also won 4 matches, but they did have a pretty favourable draw. Their schedule was just the 15th toughest, and given that they were ranked 3rd, then they should have done really, really well. And they actually managed to avoid playing a true Div A team, so they didn't end up against EMP or JGX or Blackwatch. Now they did have a KD of 1.6, which was pretty good, and a kill rate of 77%, but they were probably just a little bit up and down, given just how good they are, particularly on the back of a sensational MOR. I think they probably would have been expecting more from themselves in this one. White Knight Legion finished in 8th. They won 4 matches as well. A pretty good finish given that they ranked 12th. They were the 12th seed on roster strength. But they also benefited from a pretty favourable draw. It was the 19th toughest schedule. And they only just got home in a couple of games. So 4 matches was a little bit flattering for them. They did have pretty good stats though, all things considered. A KD of 1.4 and a kill rate of 71%. Which was, yeah, as I said, pretty good. And their average match scores and damages were also really, really good. So I think reflecting some pretty good individual performances from White Knight Legion. I think they lacked a little bit of the cohesion that they had in MOR, but still a really good finish for them. The mighty clan Crossfire finished in 9th, and that was a little behind their 7th ranked seeding coming into the tournament. They also won 4 matches, and they also had somewhat of a favourable draw. It was just the 14th toughest schedule of the tournament, but they were one of the few teams to play 2 of the top 3 teams. Another team that made it pretty hard to win, they won more than 3 drops just once out of these 6 matches. They did manage an even KD of 1.0 and a kill rate of 63%, and they were bang on average really for their match score and their damage, bang on the tournament average. Their accuracy though was pretty good, particularly compared to the teams that finished pretty close to them. For example, they destroyed 293 components on their way to 113 kills. So again, a pretty good showing all up there from my unit. Cameron's Highlanders Claymores finished in 10th, and that was of course very close to their 9th ranked seeding coming in. They also won 4 matches, and they ended up with a very, very favourable draw after losing rounds 2 and 3, and they ended up with only the 20th toughest schedule. They had a good KD of 1.6 and a kill rate of 76%, and their average match score and damage was also very, very good. So, despite having a pretty soft draw, Claymore did come through and show their quality in really taking advantage of some opposition that probably weren't as highly ranked as they were. MS Crab People finished in 11th, and they were probably the one of 2 teams that were most affected by the format. They came into the tournament ranked 6, but they had the 5th toughest schedule in the tournament. And arguably the toughest if we look outside the stats, because they played 3 teams who finished in the top 4. Now they still managed 3 wins, which is fantastic, and a KD of 0.7 and a kill rate of 52%. So have to give the Crabbies a lot of credit, given that how tough it would be to play those top teams. They've done really, really well to end up in 11th. 2 to 8th Death from above were 12th, and they had come into the tournament ranked 13th. They won 3 of their matches. They also had a pretty tough schedule, the 10th toughest, and they did play some of the toughest non-Div A teams. Now they did struggle a little, winning by more than 3 drops only once, but they did have a pretty solid KD of 1.1 and a kill rate of 67%. Now they would have really fancied themselves against like DSAG and against Wild Ones, so they actually could have finished a little bit higher than they did, but again, given their relative roster strength, they've done pretty well to end up there in 12th. Furia finished in 13th, and they also won 3 matches. They had come in ranked 16th, so finished ahead of their seeding, though they benefited from a really soft schedule, just the 26th toughest out of 33 schedules. They had a KD of 1.1 and a kill rate of 66%, though again, we should add some perspective to that Furia, as I understand, are an EU team, and I think they were dealing with some pretty tough game times. So, if they were playing in the wee hours of the morning, it makes it just that much harder to do. So, well done to Furia for even taking part in the tournament, and of course, for finishing where they did ultimately ahead of their seeding. 2 to 8th Snack Watch were 14th after winning 3 matches, and that was well ahead of their 20th seeding coming in. Now, Snack Watch were the best of the new teams, so the new teams that were formed for this tournament, and ironically, they ended up playing half of their matches against other 2 to 8 teams. Now, they also had a really tough schedule, the 7th toughest, and they played 2 of the teams who ended up finishing in the top 4. They still managed a KD of 1.1 and a kill rate of 55%, so a very good tournament for Snack Watch. Comstar Postal Service finished in 15th after coming in ranked as 15th, so they did land where it's expected. They actually performed really strongly given that they had the 11th toughest schedule. They won 3 matches and took 17 drops overall. They had an impressive 1.4 KD and 77% kill rate, and their average match score and damage rates were also really good. So I really hope we get to see more of Comstar in comp, and that they stick together as a team. Dropship 4 was 16th, a little behind their seeding of 14th. Now they also won 3 matches, but they had a softer schedule than, say, Comstar, who was just behind, just ahead of them. Dropship 4's schedule was just the 18th toughest overall. Now that schedule did actually include DSAG, so it was probably a little bit tougher than the stats would tell us, but D4 still managed a positive KD of 1.1 and a 67% kill rate, so they still did do a good job of getting their damage down range, and they did win 16 drops, which is pretty good. So yeah, but of course, with the momentum that they had from MOR, they were probably expecting just a little bit better showing than that. Aces Wild Waffle House was 17th, which was very close to their 18th seed coming in. They won 3 matches and 14 drops, and they had a KD of 0.8 and a kill rate of 59%. Now, whilst that might not seem as though they're outstanding, they also had the 9th toughest schedule in the tournament, including matches against JGX, against Claymore, and against Crab People. So, in my opinion, it's actually a really good effort, particularly given that they won against Claymore. I do have to point out their accuracy, though. They needed only 245 components for the 107 mechs they killed. Now, that's a similar accuracy rate to someone like Blackwatch, who's a very good Div A team. Davian Spud Force were 18th overall, and they had come in ranked as the 17th seed, so they effectively swapped places with Waffle House based on their seeding. They won 3 matches, but they actually only won 9 drops, so they did cut things as close as they could come, really. They did have a pretty tough schedule, the 13th toughest overall, and that included the lovely round 1 match against EMP, so unfortunately Davian Spud Force had to take one for the team there and play EMP first up. Their KD was just 0.5 and their kill rate was just 43%, so they're probably pretty lucky to have won the matches that they did, but ultimately winning is what matters. So certainly credit to the Spud Force for just getting the job done. So well done to them. Clan Widowmaker finished in 19th, winning 3 matches and 15 drops. They had come in ranked 21st, so a positive finish. And they did end up with a very, very favourable draw, just the 28th toughest. So yeah, a pretty soft there for a team like Clan Widowmaker. They had an even KD at 1.0 and their kill rate was 65%. So some decent performance there, though. You probably would have expected them to dominate a little bit more, given how soft the schedule ended up being. Mechs Crawdads, the other MS team, were in 20th, and now that was well ahead of their 27th seed coming in. Their schedule was fairly good, about where you would expect, the 21st toughest overall. But that did include Wild Ones, and it did include Comstar, a couple of teams that had performed really well. They won 3 matches and 15 drops, and they were the kings of the 3-2 match. Every one of their matches came down to a 3-2 decision one way or the other. So despite that negative KD at 0.8 and a kill rate at just 59%, I really do think it's one of the more impressive performances of the tournament. To get through and get 3 wins, given that they were ranked 27th coming in, was fantastic. So yeah, certainly hope that they stick together as a team, and that we do see them in future comps. Panzer Regiment finished in 21st, which is very, very good given that they came in seeded at 32nd. They won 2 matches and took drops off all of their opponents, which is really great, and that included a bye in round 2. Now, they did have a pretty favourable schedule to help them. It was the 27th toughest, but they did manage a KD of 0.9 and a kill rate of 62%, which is pretty good. So a pretty good tournament for 502, so well done to those guys. Paragon Sect ended up in 22nd, and they had the second worst differential from their seeding. They initially came in seeded as 10th, and of course ended up finishing in 22nd. Now they did win 3 matches, but they never won more than 3 drops in a match, and they did have the second easiest schedule in the tournament, so they probably feel that they should have done a bit more than they did. They had a KD of 0.9 and 61% kill rate, and given how high their average match score and damage was, I think that probably speaks a little bit to a lack of accuracy. When we look at it, we see that they had to destroy 334 components throughout the tournament for only 110 kills. So that's an average of about 3, which is getting up there. The other Smoke Adders team, 505th, were 23rd, and that's a pretty good result given that they were 29th seeded. They won 2 matches and had a bye, although they did only win 9 drops. It was a KD of 0.7 and a kill rate of 51%. Their schedule was probably pretty fair, the 25th toughest overall, but Smoke Adders, they'll probably feel that they could have been a little bit better with getting their damage in. They were fairly low in overall kills and damage, so I'm not sure whether that was an accuracy issue or whether it was a strategy issue, being in the right place to take advantage and get your damage down range, but that's something that they'll probably want to consider moving forward, but still a positive tournament for them. 228th Death from Below finished in 24th, and were unfortunately the team with the largest differential. They came in ranked 11th seed, and ended up finishing 24th, so 13 places lower than expectation. They won 2 matches and 13 drops overall, but they had a few issues fielding a full team in the last 2 of their games. In fact, fielding just 4 pilots in a match against Seraphim. Without Chortles in there playing lights out in this tournament, now that is pun intended, look, they may have struggled probably even further than they did. Now, they did still manage a KD of 1.1 and a kill rate of 71%, so it does show just how good that team can be, but I think they'll probably be a little bit disappointed once again, considering the momentum that they had gained through MOR and the really, really good performance that we had seen in that last tournament. Sky Rangers finished 25th, and that was right on expectation given that they had come in seeded as 26th. They also won 2 matches, which is pretty good, seeing as they had a tougher than average schedule, the 17th hardest overall. Now, they did take drops off all but one of their opponents on their way to a 0.7 KD and 53% kill rate. Their round 1 win against Paragon Sect was very, very good, and they really pushed Clan Crossfire in round 2, so certainly a lot for Sky Rangers to be proud of in this tournament. Clan Extra Fleck, the other Clan Crossfire team, were 26 overall, which was very close to their 25th seed coming in. They also won 2 matches, also taking drops off all but one of their opponents, and they ended up winning 16 drops overall, which is pretty impressive for this lower part of the table. Their schedule was pretty fair. It was the 24th toughest overall, and they had a almost positive KD, 0.9 there, and a kill rate of 61%. A pretty good showing from another new team, and just want to give a personal shout out to Matt Moisa and Small Baguette from my unit, who did, I think, an outstanding job leading this team. It was their first time doing that in comp, and I think they did a pretty fantastic job. Blackthorn Dragoons finished in 27th, which was just a short way behind their 24th seeding. They won 1 match and 11 drops, and they did have a bye in the final round. And they'll be a bit bummed that they couldn't kind of bring the momentum that they'd had from MOR into this tournament. They were very good in MOR, but probably a little bit underwhelming in this one. Their schedule was pretty strong, but it was teams I think that they probably could have beaten. Accuracy and kill efficiency certainly looked to be a bit of an issue. They had to destroy 255 components for just 79 kills, so a little bit lacking there and something for them to work on. Aces Wild Black Aces finished in 28th, and that was quite a way behind their 19th seeding. They did win 2 matches, but they were the other team alongside Crab People who really caught the wrong end of the Swiss system. They ended up with the 6th most difficult draw in the tournament. That included 4 teams in the top 10. So that's a really, really tough ask, and it's a massive credit to Black Aces that they performed as well as they did, getting those 2 wins. They had a KD of 0.6 and a kill rate of 47%. They showed some pretty good accuracy, destroying 242 components on their way to killing 85 mechs. Jade Corsair finished in 29th, also a little way behind their 23rd seed ranking coming in. They did win 2 matches though, and 14 drops, which is really good, and they took drops off all but one of their opponents, so they were pretty competitive. The finishing drops, I think, seemed to be a bit of an issue for Jade Corsair. I mean, they had a KD of 0.8 and a 57% kill rate, but they killed far more mechs than teams that finished in a relatively similar position. So they were destroying the mechs, but just not getting the wins. So potentially maybe a strat issue for Corsair or something like that, but at least something that they can look at for the next tournament is how to convert those kills into drop wins. Seraphim Regiment finished in 30th, almost right on their 31st seed ranking. They won 1 match and 7 drops and had a slightly tougher schedule than teams in similar position. It was the 22nd hardest overall. Now, they did manage a KD of 0.6 and a kill rate of 39%, so they'll be pretty happy that they were as competitive as they were. Now, they will be a little bit gutted that they lost to that 4 pilot death from below team in the last round. That was certainly one that they probably should have expected to take. Sons of Thunder, the other Cameron's Highlanders team, finished in 31st, and that was pretty close to their 30th seed. They won just the 1 match in the last round, but they did struggle a bit. They only won 5 drops in total. And Aces Wild Dead Man's Hand finished in 32nd with 1 win and 7 drops, and performed probably a little bit better than their record would suggest. They did much more damage and killed more mechs than the other teams in the very bottom of the standings. So probably another team where there were some really good individual performances. But obviously maybe some work to do in regards to strats or what's happening in the mech lab. And finally we had the other Aces Wild team, Suicide Kings, finishing last, which was actually where they were seeded. they were the only team not to get a win, so props for taking part, and let's hope that they do stay part of the comp scene. I think there was potentially a lot of first-timers in there, so do stick at it, those members. Great that you have taken part there. So that's how the teams finished, whilst we will talk more about the Swiss format with Not Bob and Kellen in another podcast. I think the most obvious thing generally is that teams finished pretty close to where they were seeded coming in. In fact, 23 of the 33 teams finished within 4 places of their initial seeding, so there was a few surprise packages, but not too many. Now, all but one team won a match. The average kill rate was 61%, and on average, teams destroyed 289 components for 106 kills. So that figure is 2.7 components per kill. So that's the one to keep in mind. And of course, yeah, congratulations to EMP for winning in such a dominant fashion, and congratulations to all the teams for their efforts in the tournament. Right, from teams to pilots, and let's look firstly at the winners of the tournament's specialty awards. The damage leader was Chortles from 2 to 8th Death from Below, who was huge in this tournament, amassing 14,125 damage across the drops that he played. Now that's a tick over 470 damage per drop. Fantastic. The assist leader was Salith from EMP, who took the title with 127 assists. What does that mean? That means Salith took a part in killing 71% of every mech that his team killed. Very, very impressive. The kill leader was Texan Scrublord from Majestic 12, and he maintained the crown of lethality that he had garnered midway through comp, and of course the impressive showing in MOR. He topped that tally with 38 kills across the tournament. The KMDD leader, now Chimera from EMP and Texan, shared the honours here, both with 38 KMDDs. In fact, Chimera and Texan shared first and second for both kills and KMDDs, though I do need to point out Chimera actually played 3 fewer drops than Texan, so yeah, pretty good there by Chimera. The component destroyer, Chimera again was devastating. 78 components destroyed, and that really did highlight his accuracy. His rate of components destroyed to kills was 2.1, so yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. The team damage leader, also someone from EMP, and that was Reckless, who took the crown. 712 total team damage across the tournament, though I suspect that some of that was deliberate just for some shits and giggles. I know that EMP were kind of dropping strikes on themselves and shoot themselves for laughs at the ends of some of the drops. Now, some of the other key metrics and key pilot performances, I've looked at a minimum of 10 drops played to qualify for these. Now, the match score per ton goes to Chortles from Death from Below, who averaged 9.5 match score per ton, and also took the damage crown as well, averaging 14.1 damage per ton, which is very, very impressive. The best average overall match score and damage was also Chortles, averaging 311.4 match score, and as I mentioned earlier, 470 damage. So yeah, an outstanding effort across the board there from Chortles. Now on to the different classes now, and surprise, surprise, Chortles again showed his light pilot credentials, averaging 289 match score in light. That included 12 kills and 45 assists. In mediums, we had Kraz Napeski from JGX topping the charts. Kraz averaged 308 match score with 16 kills and 45 assists across 11 drops in a medium. St. Pauli from Comstar Postal Service was the best in heavy mechs, averaging 290 match score and getting 19 kills in heavies across 20 drops. And in the most rarely played class, the assaults, it was Invictus from 2 to 8th Death from Above, who was the best in the tournament, averaging 257 match score and 14 kills over 16 drops played in an assault. Now for me though, the pilot of the tournament, as you've probably guessed, is Chortles. who really did play their house down in a team that didn't perform particularly well overall. Now, Chortles topped a lot of the metrics from that per ton basis, and that was really based on just how well Chortles goes in that commando. And he played that commando 16 times. So, yeah, in more than half the drops, he was in that. So, absolutely fantastic. Did a really, really good job there, Chortles, and really chucked the team on your back there, despite some of the challenges that Death from Below faced, and still came through as probably the tournament's best pilot. So talking now about the Mechs and the Strats and what we learned from this tournament. Now, I did cover a bit on the Mechs in the mid-comp review, and I don't actually think a lot has changed since what I discussed then. So I'll go through the numbers surrounding the Mechs pretty quickly. And of course, hopefully a lot of you have been using the ISC stat pack, and you've been able to track these numbers, these usage numbers as we've gone through. Now, the most used chassis in order were the Vulcan, the Assassin, the Grasshopper, the Warhammer, the Wolfhound, the Crab, the Roughneck, the Victor, the Bushwhacker, and the Commando. Lights dominated the per ton metrics as we would expect, with the Commando, the Flea, the Wolfhound, and the Javelin all proving really, really strong. Whilst it was the mobile mediums like the Vulcan and the Assassin that were really, really good as well in that medium bracket. Generally speaking, the heavy classes found it hard to compete when we're looking at the per tonnage figures. But when we're looking at overall damage, the Jägermech, the Grasshopper, and the Champion actually did really, really well for that weight class. Now, the Assaults found it even harder than the heavies, but the Annihilator was still actually really, really good, averaging over 400 damage per use, over 110 times. For the individual variants, the Vulcan 5T was used over 550 times. It was the most used, and Daylight was second. Of course, following the Vulcan were the usual suspects, the Assassins 23 and 21, the Warhammer 6R, and the Grasshopper 5H being the next most common. Overall, though, I think that the tournament provided maybe less surprises on the mech front. It was probably what we expected, the mechs that were best able to carry out the roles required by the strats were what we saw. So given the small number of maps the teams used, they kind of settled on those mechs, and we tended to see them time and time again. And again, I talked a little bit more, I had talked about that a bit in the mid-comp review. Now, across the Martial Olympiad Reborn, we'd generally seen two strats. The first one was that cap and control type approach with long-range mechs, and we did see some of that in ISC, but it was probably more in an Overwatch sense. Saw a lot of long-range Grasshoppers, we saw Gorse Warhammers, and we saw AC2 Jägermechs as well. So there was, some trade, some poke and trade with the AC2s, but for the Gorse Warhammers and the long-range Grasshoppers, it was a lot of Overwatch that we saw, and we saw it on pretty much every map, but some pretty classic and common examples of that was the Overwatch position on Grim, on the outer part of Grim, where you can Overwatch Sigma and Gamma. Early on, we saw the Grasshoppers up on the wall on HPG when the wall strat was kind of dominating in the early parts of the tournament. And on Canyon, of course, we saw a bunch of peek and poke with lasers, Gorse, and with AC2s as well. Now, the other strat that was common in the Martial Olympiad Reborn and that we saw to some degree in ISC was that mobile brawl, and we've really seen of late the rise of the IS Medium Pulse for using as a mobile brawling weapon. And we saw obviously a ton of Vulcans used, but really common to see Wolfhounds, Roughnecks, Crabs, Phoenix Hawks, and of course 228 with the Uziels boating those MPLs, and that becoming the primary weapon seen in this mobile brawl strat. I think, though, one of the main differences that this tournament showed us, particularly when we compare it to MOR, was that it was really common for a team to bring almost a combination of those two strats. So we'd see drop decks that carried, say, 2 or 3 Overwatch mechs, 2 or 3 mobile brawlers in the Vulcans or something like that, and then maybe 1 or 2 real fast movers like a Flea or a Wolfhound or a Commando to get an early cap, but then wait and be ready to kind of join in an engagement or back cap or something like that. So whether it was because of the tonnage limit, the fact that it was 3 cap conquest, the maps that were used, or that it was 6v6, I'm not entirely sure, but I think we definitely saw less pure trading strats than we would have seen in MOR. It'd certainly be an interesting question to run by some of the team captains out there, and if you did have thoughts, then please do leave them in the comments. But whilst we certainly saw some all-in decks, like the champion brawl decks that the 2-8 teams seemed to run, or even JGX running the jumpy medium pulse mechs on Solaris to try and pull people into a kill box and then fire down on them. What we saw was far more of these bracket drop decks that was bringing in those components, bringing in the Overwatch, bringing in the fast mobile brawl, and then having that fast capper that can kind of tag in somewhere as well, that fast mover that can cap and then join in. So I think that was pretty different from ISC compared to what we had seen in MOR. Alright, so last off, let's just ask the question again around what we can take from ISC that might be relevant for the MechWarrior World Champs, or indeed for the other comps we see moving forward. Now, last time I talked about IS being really strong in that 40 ton and under bracket, and then pretty weak once you get 60 tons and over. We also talked about how medium pulse lasers for IS are really strong at the moment, as are AC2s, and I think that for future comps, when we do see an IS mech, I think it is most commonly to be one of the mechs that maybe boats those weapon systems really, really well, such as the Vulcan. So those were two of the biggest takeaways that we talked about in the mid-comp review. So there are just a couple more that I think are relevant, and I do want to give credit to some team leaders from my unit, Moisa and Small Baguette, who gave me some feedback in this regard to help inform it. So the first one is about the map selection, and in the mid-comp review I had talked about perhaps the risk of a narrowed map selection, and we saw of course that the wall strat became pretty dominant on HPG, and the organisers did opt to take some action around that. ISC I think has helped highlight that map selection is a pretty crucial part of the game, and it affects the spectacle. So it will be really, really important for world champs to be able to find that balance between a map selection that's not too narrow, so that you're ending up on canyon all the time, like we've seen before, and not too wide a selection where teams don't necessarily have the chance to prep adequately, and that they are doing things a little bit more on the fly, and it is a little bit more random. So it really raises the question of whether to include a map selection process to guarantee certain maps, like we saw in ISC, or to have a selection process and risk teams selecting the same 1 or 2 maps each time. Now, some parts of that forced selection worked well for ISC. It did make it easier, I think, for teams to prepare and to refine their strats, save them a bit of time. They knew what they were coming up against, but it also has that risk of the meta strats emerging, just one dominant strategy coming up and having to play it or having to counter it to win, and we saw that to a degree with the wall strat on HPG, and again, as we have higher skilled teams where the margin of error is that much less, then those meta strats become even more important. So For the comp Cognoscenti, that will be deciding what world champs look like or what future comps look like. That map selection process becomes so important because the map and the mode are such a key element to how a game will play out. Now, the other thing to mention, and the other key takeaway, I think, from the ISC is that it had a really, really good participation rate, all things considered, and that included a few first-time teams. And one of the reasons for that, or one of the positives, I think, of an Innisphere-only tournament is that the IS Mechs are quite a nice entry point into the game and quite a nice entry point into comp. And this was something that Matt pointed out in particular, was that IS Mechs, of course, have a bit more survivability. They are a bit tankier than their clan counterparts. And of course, with the weapon systems that they have, it's less that high burst alpha that you might get with clan, the jump out, fire all your lasers, and then jump back in. And those two things help combine to mean that you get a greater time to kill. The TTK with IS only Mechs or IS versus IS is a bit more. So that is a good starting point for teams that are newer to comp, or in fact teams that are less skilled. And it does mean that the enjoyability factor, I think, is increased because all of the teams that are competing feel as though they can be on the battlefield for a little bit longer and not get instantly deleted. Now, the same thing goes, I guess, for comps that involve less mechs overall. So a firing line of 12 mechs, of course, looks very different to a firing line of 6 mechs. There's less angles that can be covered and all of those kind of things. So all of those things help increase the overall time to kill, and that becomes another really important factor for comp moving forward, is where do you want the time to kill balance to be? And the truth being, the more mechs that you have on the battlefield, the more lines that are able to be covered across a map, and of course mechs that are closer to the meta, particularly clan mechs that can deliver that high burst alpha, the more that we see of those, the more reduced time to kill is, and once again that becomes another factor that influences the spectacle of the game that we are seeing. So that is something that ISC showed us. It showed us what IS versus IS look like, and what an increased time to kill may do, and how that might be important for comp moving forward. So those are the takeaways. Again, in the mid-comp review, I did cover those things. I won't bother repeating those here. If you are interested, go back and listen to those and check out what else we had to say about the key takeaways from the tournament. Right, so that is probably enough from me. As mentioned, we are going to chat with tournament organisers Not Bob and Callan Farstar from Aces Wild, and hopefully chat to these guys and reflect a little bit on the tournament itself. Of course, the format, the structure, and some of those things that they've learned from running a tournament like this. Once again, I would also like to give a massive shout out to the shoutcasters who gave up their time and energy to bring so much of the action to us. In particular, casters like Draven and System Belmont, who time and time again are volunteering to cast these matches and bring the action to us. They do a ton of work. Draven solo casted in the same way that Kurlon did in MOR, and again, hopefully you guys understand just how tricky it can be to do those kind of things. So thank you guys, you're really helping promote competitive play, and it's really valuable to the community as well. So GG from all of the listeners. I would also like to thank PGI for the support that they provided for the tournaments, and this tournament in particular, with both the winnings, the MC that players and teams will take away, and of course the giveaways that were featured on stream. So to Tina and to Darren, I hope you guys both listen. A big thank you from the Mech Bros in the competitive community. It is fantastic to have PGI helping the players walk away with some swag. Now lastly, as always, a thank you to our incoming missile patrons, Dan N, Ryan Craig, Jondoeiowa, MWO Comp, Jacob Sawyer, Shaky Snake, Brios, Chilgapsan, Knight of the Day, Nikoro Doomguard, and our newest patron, Robin Merkley. Thank you guys for your support, it is greatly appreciated, And if you wanted to support the podcast in more tangible ways like these amazing individuals, you can become a patron for as little as $2 per month. So look for Incoming Missile Podcast on Patreon. You hit a high enough tier and you can join us on the podcast just like Nikoro did in the episode that we did really recently. Right, enough from me, Mech fans. I'll catch you all next time.
Now you're weeping shades of Cozened Indigo, got them into serving your Now you used up all of my black cattle. You must have been
Shutdown sequence initiated.